It is Thursday, and that means it's time for Event Domination, where I share everything we've learned as running and scaling our conference in the hopes that you can do the same thing. Because honestly, running my conference has totally changed my life. And this is something I'm very, very passionate about. And today, I'm going to be sharing the not so fun part about running a conference, which is budgeting. So budgeting is something that you have the penny pinchers, you've got the bookkeepers. It's not like the sizzle. You're not on stage. You're not you're not doing the fun stuff, but it's a really important part. And this is actually one of the most common questions when we get when we start working with an event, especially if they're newer in their first or second year. Like, hey, like, what does a budget look like? How do I budget? How do I allocate funds the right way? And that's exactly what I'm going to be walking you through right now. So when it comes to budgeting, there's going to be a bunch of big chunks or categories in your budget. And I'm going to actually show you how they interact with the other chunks and how everything works together with this, okay? So because one of the big issues, and this was the thing I learned my first year, right? So my first year, middle of lockdowns, I'm like, hey, I want to run this real estate investing conference. We had Kevin O'Leary. It was great. But I had no idea what to expect in terms of how much does it cost in terms of ad spend to get this thing in. How much is it going to cost for food and beverage? How much does a venue cost? I was starting from scratch. So we almost built the budget as we went, which isn't the best way to do it. Now we're at a point where we know how everything's going to slot in, and we know, hey, like we're going to have roughly this amount that we need to tackle into ad spend. This amount is going to do this, and these are our revenue streams and how it's all going to work out. Okay, so this is how we set it out, and for our conference accelerator. So these are events that come to us and say, hey, listen, can you help us scale? Maybe they're stuck at 500 people and they want to get to 1,000. We just onboarded an event the other day, and they're looking to go from for a couple hundred people to double to 400 or 500 people. Perfect. Like that's exactly what we do. And budgeting is a big part of that, because we have to make sure all the different teams and parts of the marketing and sales machine are fed, and you need money to do that. Okay. So the two biggest expenses or costs that you have when you're running an event, number one here, I'm just going to do our blocks here. Number one is ad spend, for sure. Unless you already have a huge database, you have a sales team, maybe you're like Tony Robbins, you need to have ad spend, because you have to go into the marketplace and put your event in front of people who have no idea who you are. And the reason this is important is, there's a bunch of events that we work with where they came to us because they got into trouble. Why did they get into trouble? Because they kept selling to the same people. And what happens is you lose your audience through attrition. So, maybe you started at 700 attendees and you don't bring new people in. Well, now your attendees are going to drop to 500. Then you're going to drop to 300, right? Because you lose people through attrition. You always need to have fresh blood, a fresh audience coming into your event, especially if you're scaling. Right? Because if you're scaling, you have to overcome that attrition, but also add people on top. How do you do that? Ad spend, right? You have to bring in people who have no idea who you are, and they're just hearing about your event for the first time. This is what you want. So to do that, you need to have ad spend. So that's going to be a huge, huge cost for you, because that's what's going to put you into the market. You're going to play offense. All right. The second big cost that you're going to run into is going to be talent. Now, why do I say talent? And actually, I should explain what I mean by talent. So, talent is going to be your larger keynote speakers that are going to bring the sizzle to the event. Because how we break down our speakers is we've got A-tier speakers. So these are the people that everybody knows. They're going to create the buzz. If you're running ad creative, these are the people click on. Perfect. That's your A-tier. Then you've got B-tier speakers. So B-tier speakers are industry experts. They know their stuff. The content's really solid. They know what they're talking about. They're good on stage, but they don't have that celebrity factor, and they're not going to create the buzz. And you need a mix between A and B tier speakers. You can't just have all celebrities on stage. Number one, that's not cost effective. But number two, the industry experts, they're the ones who are actually going to deliver the bulk of the content, right? They're your workhorse speakers. But what we found in how we help other events is a lot of events will start, and this is kind of how I got into this too. I was competent, I knew my stuff, right? But only a small group of people knew who I was, right? So now I had to leverage A-tier speakers to get them in, and now we can deliver content and help deliver our expertise to the audience. So you need that mix. Now, C-tier speakers, these are people who do not score well, and you want to jettison those people from the speaker roster, right? So you've got your A and B tier speakers. But the A tier speaker, you're going to compensate them for showing up. Why? They're taking time away from their family. They're taking time away from their business, right? So even if you have a good relationship with somebody, like with us, because of what we do, we've got access to a whole bunch of different people. You're still going to pay the person to show up, even if you know them, right? It's like, hey, are you interested in coming out? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, let's figure out how much we're going to pay you, because you're compensating them for their time. Not only their time, but for their image and their brand, because now their brand is attached to your event, and that's a lot of what you're paying for. Okay, so talent's going to be a big expense. Now, breaking this down a little bit more. So those are your top two. Now you're going to get into the nitty gritty, right? So now you're going to have venue costs. And then you're going to have food and beverage. And let me talk about food and beverage in a bit. Then you have staffing. And then you're going to have tech. Okay, these are the big ones. So venue. Venue is really, really important. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and one of the catalysts for me actually launching my own conference, was that every other event in my industry was the exact same. You go to the same hotel ballrooms, you have the same setup, you got the speaker on the little tiny stage with the 2 PowerPoint slides. It's all the same. It was all the same. Same hotel ballroom. It was just whatever. And that inspired me. And I'm like, you know what? Somebody's not doing better here. I should come in and change things up. And that's what we did. But for venue has such a huge impact on how people feel, how people perceive your event. So the first year with our venue, I was in the middle of COVID lockdown. Nobody was opening the doors. The venue we ended up at was the only one that would sneak us in the back door. But after our first year, we got off ground, then we needed to go bigger. So we ended up at I would call it the premier venue for events and conferences in the entire country. Massive place, right? It gives us a lot. But you're going to pay for that privilege, right? So the venue is going to be a sizable cost. Now, with us, we take up hundreds of thousands of square feet. So our venue cost is pretty big. However, it's not as big as the ad spend, and it's not as big as the talent cost, okay? And then you've got food and beverage. So food and beverage is going to be if you provide food, you've got beverage. Now, food and beverage absolutely will destroy your budget. Number one, food is so expensive. And then also the venue will likely have a monopoly on the food and beverage. So for us, and we were actually just joking yesterday with an event that's going to come on board with us, they're like, yeah, we were paying $6 per bottle of water. Is ridiculous. And I told them the story of this year. We had Jordan Belfort as one of our speakers, and obviously, he wants his Red Bull. We were not allowed to go out to the grocery store and just buy a case of Red Bull. We had a special order Red Bull through the venue at a ridiculous markup. But it's like, I liken food and beverage with venues as you're in Disney World or Disneyland. As soon as you walk through those gates, you are a captive. You are a prisoner in there, and they are going to nickel and dime everything from you. But that's the cost you pay to get into a top tier venue like that. If you're just starting out, yeah, you can go for a lower tier venue depending on what your requirements are, but then you're going to lose some things. You're going to lose, ceiling height. You're going to lose rigging if you're in a smaller venue. You're going to lose this prestige, which does help. You're going to lose all of those things. So it's a pros and cons type of thing. But food and beverage, it will destroy your event. And honestly, per person for a lunch buffet, you're probably paying $50 to, I would say, like $60 per person per meal, right? And that's going to give you a little bit of wiggle room, but per meal. And so you can see how that quickly adds up. And this is why when events come to work with us and we're going over ticket pricing, we had one last week where, they were charging $300 for a ticket, which sounds good, but then they're paying them. But then they're paying for their food and beverage. They're offering lunch. Okay, great. Well, that's $100 out of the 300, right? And then they're adding snacks. So that's going to be 25 each day, right? Because it was a 2-day event. So now you got another 50. So now you're out a $1.50, let's call it. And so half your ticket price. And that's before we even get into ad spend, before talent, before all these other expenses. You're underwater. It doesn't make sense. And this is why you have to be so careful when you're building out your ticket tiers and what you're offering. Like food and beverage will absolutely destroy you. It will. So you really have to be careful with that. So people are like, oh yeah, I just want to feed everybody. Well, that sounds great, but it doesn't make sense. Like you can't run an event that way. And you have staffing costs. So who's involved in staffing costs? Well, you're going to have registration staff, and you can either have outsource that and bring people in, like to have registration staff. If you have your own employees, you can use them for registration, but you need paid people. Volunteers do not work at professional level events. You can't rely on them, right? Because there's no contract, there's no monetary value being exchanged. And a lot of times volunteers, they just want to get into your event for free. So they say they're going to volunteer, but then you go and you need them for something. Well, they've disappeared because they're hidden watching the big keynote person. It happens all the time. Or, with volunteers, you have, let's say, 10 people lined up, while 3 the day of just won't show. Right? There's no accountability because they're not being paid. So you need to pay staff. And that was a mistake we made our first year. We had some volunteers. It just, we learned our lesson that way. So now everybody's paid. So you have registration staff, right? And now you're going to have other staff, right? So if you have marketing team, video, a media team, you got to pay those people, right? And then you've got others. Other staff, so you could have sponsorship. Like the list adds up quite a bit, but these are staffing costs that your event has. So you have to figure that out. Then you've got tech, right? So who's running your registration platform? You can't use Eventbrite if you're running a high level professional conference, right? So you have to have that tech. And what does that tech enable you to do? In our second year, the registration system crashed the day of, and we had thousands of people trying to come in. And what we paid a good chunk of money for did not work. And it caused a whole lot of headaches for us on the front and the back end. So tech's really, really important. And you have to make sure you're getting something solid that's reliable. And then you have to have a backup in place, like a paper backup in place. So now when we run events, we're going in assuming our front tech is going to fail. And so how are we going to run this thing based on pen and paper, like the old-fashioned way. Like we are prepared for that because we're assuming that's what's going to happen. That's how you have to enter into the event. So if you have 2,000, 3,000 people coming in the door, and you're assuming your front end tech's going to fail because tech always has issues, well, like how are you going to run through people that way if that indeed does happen? So, but you have to have registration, right? Now you're going to have tracking costs for your ad and media, whether it's Hyro, state, whatever it is. You need to have tracking costs. You're going to have website costs too. So, like you can see, all this stuff adds up. But these are the main components that you're going to work into the budget. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, Seth, well, how do I allocate? How do I budget? What percentage? This is how I tend to build events out. I identify, and this is where we do a lot of market research. You're going to identify the main pain points of your audience, what's missing in the marketplace. That's what you're going to find. Then you're going to look into, okay, well, who are the aid tier speakers who are going to be the best fit for my audience and who is going to resonate with the audience? Great. You figure out the cost for that. Once you figure that out, now you can build the event around the core that you must have for your event. Because what happens is a lot of events will come to us and say, hey, listen, this is the event. We have X amount of budget for a speaker, and it's not going to be a lot of money. And they're like, okay, great. Well, we want to do this top tier event and do all this stuff with cold traffic. Well, the fact is it doesn't work that way. Because if your event's not designed to scale and sell from the get-go, you're not going to be able to scale it. And this is one of the advantages we've had is we actually designed our conference to scale. We had all the right pieces in place. And a big part of that is understand the audience, understanding the pain points, and then building the event around that. And that includes the speakers. So rather than trying to fit speakers into your budget, I would budget around the speakers because that's a huge, huge part of how you're going to get traction in the marketplace, especially with cold traffic who has no idea who you are. Now, on the ad spend side, so realistically, like you could be, $100,000 for a speaker, you could be $500,000, you could be $1 million for your talent. It all depends on the size and what you're looking to do. Now, for your ad spend, it's an event will inquire with us and we'll ask them, okay, well, like, what's your ad budget? Oh, well, we're spending $20 a day. Realistically, at scale, you're going to be spending about $350 to $450 for each ticket in ad spend. And this is if you're operating at scale with thousands of tickets. And what happens is if you don't nail the actual building of the event first, that can jack up to $600, $700, $800, $900, $1,000 per ticket that you're going out. Why? Because the offer, the attraction, the product that you're selling, which is the event, it's not hitting. So now you have to generate way more leads to actually get somebody who's going to buy it. I time and time again, people come in, oh yeah, I'm a B tier, like they're who we would consider a B tier speaker. They know their stuff, but they don't have celebrity sizzle. Oh yeah, I want to be the hero of my event. Okay, great. Well, are you going to leverage other people? No, I just want to be the hero. Okay, great. Well, be prepared to spend a ton of money because right now with how you've built out the event, if you're coming to us with an already built out plan and we're inheriting that, be prepared to spend a lot because you're missing some key components on what makes a scalable conference. But generally speaking, with us, we're spending $350 to $450 a ticket in terms of ad spend. So you can see how the ad budget has to be pretty significant. Now, how does this tie in to everything else that happens? Well, the ad budget is what's going to fuel your sales process. So now you're going to have your sales guys pick up the phone, you're going to dial, you're going to talk with all your leads and sell them the tickets. If that component isn't there, you're basically burning your money. And this is why when we work with events with Conference Accelerator, a lot of people come to us thinking, oh yeah, I have a marketing issue, right? It's not a marketing issue 90% of the time. 90% of the time is going to be the actual event needs reworking. Then the ticket pricing and tier structure needs reworking. Everything needs to be fixed, right? And it turns out, well, it's not the marketing issue. Like, yeah, we can improve it, but it's everything else that comes before that. That's generally what happens because the event doesn't have the right components. Nobody's attracted to it. So that's why nobody's buying, right? And then we don't have the right ads in the creative. We don't have the right hooks. Nobody's buying. Okay. We're not generating the leads. And then when we get to the sales process, hey, well, we don't even know how to sell conference tickets. That's kind of what we overcome in the front end of Conference Accelerator, right? Because you have to have everything in place there. So if you're spending the money, but you don't have the team to convert it, you're toast. If you have the money, but the creative is wrong or the messaging's wrong, you're toast, right? Like that's what we have to overcome. But at the top end, ad budget has to be very, very healthy. And we have a whole formula we follow to figure this out. Talent cost has to be healthy. And we have a whole process that we follow in terms of determining who's going to be the right fit that's going to land with the audience and actually help you sell tickets rather than work against you and just be a cost. Because when we think of it, your speaker, your talent, it's not an expense. It really isn't. And a lot of people think of speakers as an expense. You're actually investing in an asset because now an asset can be leveraged. So every time we're paying for a speaker to get on stage, they have to be an asset to the event, which means if we're paying X, let's call it 100 grand. If we're paying that 100 grand.
This camera's off real quick. Just tell the audience.
Yeah, hold on. We just had a camera die on us here, so just give us 1 sec. Rabbi, the media director extraordinaire, is running around trying to fix this thing. We'll have a timer. We'll see how long it takes to get back online. Here we go. We probably just lost all the audio too, right?
No,
Are we?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we are back.
Oh, we're good?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. So as I was saying, a lot of events think of their talent cost as an expense, right? Because it's money going out. But in reality, you're investing in an asset because an asset is something you can leverage to grow. So when we're looking at bringing in talent that we're paying, we need to know for sure that number one, it's going to hit with the audience, but number two, if we're paying, let's call it $100,000, we're going to recoup that plus more in terms of ticket sales because that person, that asset is going to generate that demand. That's how you have to tackle talent, right? It's not an expense, it's an asset. Now, we have a very specific process that we follow when it comes to making sure somebody's going to hit because if you make a wrong decision in terms of your A-tier speakers and you have people that aren't going to hit with the audience, it's just going to fall flat, right? So you need to make sure that you're getting the right people. And we have that process dialed in on the whole like SOP to figure out who the right person is to bring in. But when you find that right person, you need to build the budget around that because that's a core element of your event. You're not trying to slot a speaker in because what happens there, now you're just focused on cost. But with an asset, it's like buying a good piece of real estate. Like the best piece of real estate, you're going to pay more for it, but like it's going to be worth more down the road. It's the same thing with speakers. If you know that this person is the right fit for your event, you have to be able to build the budget around that person rather than slot somebody in. Because every time you try and slot somebody in to a set dollar amount, you're not doing what's best for the audience. You're not doing what's best for the event. You're not doing what's best for the messaging and the sizzle and what's going to actually draw people in. And this is where you have events fall flat, right? So we can definitely help you with that. But yeah, that's a huge, huge component. Okay. So when you're looking at budgeting and figuring out what everything costs with your event, Ad spend $350 to $450 a ticket. That's a good number to work with. Now, we have some events where it's less, some events where it's more, but that's a good rule of thumb just to get you going. You got talent costs. You can inquire with us. We've got rough ballparks on what different people will cost you. Now, in terms of venue, food and beverage, these are all quotes that you can get, right? So your venues, when you're hunting for the venue, we have a whole list of things that we look for in a venue, but they'll give you a quote. They'll say, okay, well, for 3 days, it's going to cost you X. Okay, great. You get into food and beverage. You're going to have a rough idea per person on what that's going to cost. Generally, you're $50 to $60 per person for some pretty good food, but again, that's going to change and vary. Staffing costs. This is where we really have to have a true idea. We really have to dive into your event and understand what type of team you need. Because, we started with a skeleton crew and now we've scaled up with our team, our org chart. We really have to dive in with you to really figure out on, who exactly you need, what that cost is going to be. It's hard to have a rule of thumb because there's so many variables at play with staffing. And then with tech, registration, the website, like all that type of stuff. Again, like there's rough costs. Like we have our own dedicated server because of the web traffic. And even with that, we still have stability issues with the website when everybody hits it because we generate a lot. Like when we launched our conference this year, we had so much traffic hit it in such a short time. Some people couldn't access it, right? So that's an issue we're always trying to overcome, but that costs money. The tracking, you're going to have that. Registration system, depending on what you're doing, right? It could be, it could be 10 grand, it could be 5 grand, it could be 20 grand, 30 grand. It really depends. And then you have, then besides this, you have other things like printing, signage, all of those other things go into the budget. But for the big ones, just get a rough handle on what this thing's going to cost. This is how you want to do it, right? Ad spend talent, you need that for sure. And then everything else is going to slot in as secondary expenses there. Okay. So if you're running a conference, if you're looking to scale, especially if you're in that 300 to 500 person range with your event and you're really looking to scale this thing to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, we can definitely help. Go to theconferenceaccelerator.com. Book a call with our team. We'll dive deep into exactly what you're doing, where we think we can help you out. Because what we'll do is we'll take our systems and processes, everything we do on our end, and we'll parachute it into your event. And you'll start working off of our playbook because it works, right? And we'll be able to turn things around and really help you scale. So theconferenceaccelerator.com, book a call, especially if you're in that, I call it the no man's land of event sizes, like 300 to 500 people. That's where we can make a huge impact for you. But, we're working with events who are a couple thousand people and also events that are 100-200 people and they're looking to scale up to like 600. Okay. So that was budgeting in a nutshell. A lot of this, we can go really, really granular with it, but this gives you a really good idea on all the different components you need in your budget. All right. So I'll see you next Thursday for event domination, but join me on Mondays for the real estate show and Tuesdays for the bullpen, which is our sales and conversion show. Okay. See you guys next week.